Mic check. This is Building Renaissance Later podcast. I'm your host, and I'll be your consultant advisor through this session, uh, Vic Vogel. Today, I've moved this actually from my Leadership Talks podcast because I normally only do those for about a half hour to my June podcast, Building Renaissance Leaders. So we could discuss a topic that I think is critical in all coaching and consulting or mentoring or however you want to approach it, and is also critical in building leadership and, frankly, building business in general. Excuse me, I got allergies all over the place here in Oklahoma, so my voice is a little off today. However, the topic is assessments. All through my career, I've used assessments. And it kind of began on my first assignment as a leader early on in my career. I really wanted to approach a particular problem with leadership. And wasn't too experienced at this yet. And so what happened was I was helping a leader, an executive, to who solicited my help in trying to change leadership behavior of a fellow leader in the organization. And basically, I took what the executive said as being the gospel and began to approach the problem with this person, and they knew I was going to help them. And uh, as we got into discussions about the problem, I began to find out I was kind of lost because what the executive told me was not what the issue seemed to be. When I started talking to this person's employees, when I talked to them, it was a totally different kind of problem, and that was came out okay, but it was an extremely difficult project to do because I started off with the wrong problem, the wrong assumption about the problem, and at the executive's request. Come to find out, the executive was some of the primary concerns with the problem. So you can see how that got a little touchy and how I had to change the whole process. So after that, I started looking around for things that I could use to help me determine what the real issue was. And that's where I got into a lot of research. And this is many, many, many years back, but much before what we have today from a scientific basis and from an assessment perspective. There were very few assessments out there that people knew about and used on a consistent basis. So I had to dig around to find the particular assessment that worked for me. And then over the years, I started using that assessment, and it also began to evolve itself. It initially was a cultural assessment, and then it moved into leadership, and they moved into team effectiveness, and it became an all-encompassing survey towards the end of my career. So, but I stuck with this organization from their start, from their genesis up through, oh, and they're very prominent today and very successful today as a success as an assessment group. Uh, and we started off with paper and pencil assessments. That's how long ago this was, before assessments were online or computer based. So that'll kind of give you an idea of where we were then, which became a little more difficult to collect, to administer and collect, etc. So we got into those kinds of things that related to assessments. And I began to use assessments on a regular basis as the as a criteria before I even decided what the issue was we needed to deal with. And that has proven to be a very, very helpful and successful way to approach change, whether it was for an individual leader or an employees or a team or a department or an area or a region for a company or a whole company. It was very useful in terms of helping to actually affect change and to help people understand what they really needed to know and do to make change. It also helped me in terms of being able to relate to the client more effectively. Uh, Once I was in there, it's awful hard to impact uh, someone, a client's behavior. It's awful hard just to go in cold. When you go in with a database driven perspective, it's hard for them to reject the information you put in front of them. It's a little easier depending on how you approach that. So, what I kind of wanted to do with assessments today, and if you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching it on LinkedIn, I don't know if I can see the LinkedIn. I haven't checked here. Let me just check and see if I'm even on LinkedIn here. Um, Sometimes these things go through correctly and sometimes they don't. We're still in the era of trying to affect change. So I'm going to try to see here if somewhere along the line I can see whether or not I'm even online with LinkedIn. Uh, so just give me a second here. Uh, yeah, it looks like I am. Good. Okay, so I know I'm on LinkedIn. So let me check YouTube here now next. Then I'll go back to LinkedIn. What I don't know is if you try to do comments through LinkedIn, I'm not sure they're going to come across on my comments and chat box on Ecamm. That tend to be a problem. So uh, I'm not sure. Let's see. Let me check up here and see it. It says I'm live on YouTube, but I'm not sure. I'm not showing live, so let me go to my uh, channel here and see if I'm there. I'm not sure it's showing up live on YouTube. So, uh, I'm assuming that I'm alive on YouTube here too. Uh, Let me go back to since I have to kind of check here on LinkedIn. Uh, let's see. Right, we're on LinkedIn. Okay, there. I'm sorry. Let me turn down the volume here. Okay. Now I think I can see the comments on LinkedIn if you happen to show up, if you join me. I know these tend to be quick and they're off schedule, and people need a lot more notice than what I give them. But my schedule has been so hectic lately that I'm having a little bit of trouble trying to schedule these far enough advance for people to be on live with me and do chats. Now, Uh, here's how this works with my podcast. I am not someone who's seeking likes. Okay, I've said this before, but I don't seek likes. The primary purpose for these podcasts is for people to be able to go back to them if they have a particular situation, and be able to go back to them, say, for example, somebody decides they want to help a leader, and they seem to remember somewhere seeing a post I had, because I post these things after I do them on LinkedIn and Twitter and a bunch of other accounts, um, just for a little while, but they're always within the context. And in this case, this will be under Building Renaissance Leaders podcast. Uh, and if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see that podcast. And this will actually be on there, and it'll be titled with something like How to Use Assessments, whatever I title it with. And then it's broken down into chapters so people can, like, if there's a situation where they need to start something, they thought they remember seeing that little bit, but they can't remember exactly what had in it, they can get on their smartphone, go to the YouTube channel. uh, if you subscribe to it, it's going to be a lot easier, and of course like me, and then hit the notification, so maybe you'll see this pop up prior to going on the air there. Uh, and of course, I try to put it in the event section on LinkedIn so people can see that too if they decide to jump in and ask a question or two. But most of the time, there's such short notice that I don't have anybody on here with me. So I'm just basically providing an information and education podcast. Uh, However, uh, what happens is you can pull out your smartphone. You can go to my YouTube channel. You can find the podcast on assessments. You can look at the chapter and go to exactly what you're kind of looking for. And it might give you some advice or some help in planning what you need to do. So these are really designed to be podcasts that are going to be available sort of like a digital library for leadership and organizational leadership. And so I have podcasts on leadership power base, podcasts on harmony, how to, and that podcast was how to optimize women in the workforce with a predominantly male driven business world. Fact is, there's a lot of science today to say women, frankly, are probably better geared to being leaders than men are. So we may not be using women as much because we have this cultural barrier in place. And how to build harmony, I did with Dr. Pauline Crawford on that show. It was a great session. And so when you go back to those, not only may you find a guest session that talks about it, but you're going to find the resources to those people. So you can go straight to them for advice if you need to. So that's the idea of these. It's not so much to try to build thousands of likes. I don't know what I would do with thousands of people who looked at me. I have come from a consulting world where I was immersed in the organization 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day every week, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, with the same people day in and day out, helping them grow, being there with them for advice, and working with them on a regular basis on site, right there with them, so that, they could come over to my office that had been set up for me in the company, and they could sit down at my desk and we could talk through things, or we could go to a conference room table and talk through things, or I could go to their place. Most of the time, I went to their place to talk with them. Uh, so that's the kind of world I grew up in. There wasn't a lot of video consulting going on back in those days. It was literally one on one, and you were inside the organization, moving around. And sometimes, if it was international, you were traveling, to Europe or Asia or somewhere, or Australia or somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, working day in and day out with people. So I really like that consulting world because it's personal. People get to know you. They feel comfortable with you. They trust you. Once you build those relationships as a client with a client, they tend to want to work with you on a regular basis, and they feel comfortable. They also feel comfortable in referring you to other people, which was where a lot of my business came from, was referrals to other people. Or maybe I did a presentation at a Society for Human Resource Management in Oklahoma City or Dallas, Texas, or somewhere like that. Uh, I tended to work out of, I house and have been in Oklahoma most of my professional career. Oklahoma City. It's proved very beneficial. It's highly central. I could get to either coast easily, north south fairly easily, and I had good connections to get to Europe or Asia or wherever I needed to go when I travel. So when it comes to consulting, I began early on with the idea that I needed to make sure that the problem I was addressing was truly the problem. And that often tended not to be the case when I was first contacted. Most time when you're contacted as a consultant, somebody calls you up, says, somebody told me you did this work. Here's my problem. Can we talk? You go visit them, you sit down and you talk with them, and they lay out what they perceive the problem to be in the organization or with a particular leader or whatever. And I learned quickly to say, I understand. I hear what you're saying. What I'd like to do is for us to get a pretty good sense of where this is relative to the individual or the organization and the whole picture. And to do that, I'd like to try to start with an organizational assessment that tells us a lot about the whole organization. And then we can talk about, defining the project. So, I think this is important because it tells you how I tend to use assessments. And they would normally say, well, I think I pretty well understand. I said, I've been through a lot of these and a lot of people tell me this and many times they're right, but sometimes they're not. And we end up having to double back and it costs a lot more money for me to have to deal with that situation at that time. And and then we got to go back and backtrack, and we add time, we add money, and it's always more difficult to correct something than to do it right in the beginning. So if at at the least you're going to have a full assessment of a lot of things that might help you improve over a period of time. So it's not like you're doing something and not getting anything for your money. And most of all, it could really help us narrow down some things. And maybe it's not as complicated as you think, or maybe it's more complicated than you think. So, before you decide to journey into it, it would make sense for you to have all the information that's prudent for you to make a good decision. And then after we do that, that's phase one. After we do that, you're going to have a lot of information about you, your organization, a lot of things. And if you decide not to go on with the project, then, you still have a lot of good quality information that you can use. And so most of the time, that pretty much helps solve the issue. Where a client was really resistant to that, I got the feeling they wanted to use me as a consultant to do something they didn't want to handle, like eliminate an employee that they might have liability with or something like that. And I normally ended up saying, well, this is pretty much, I really don't want to go into a project not having the information I need to do it right. So, I'm probably not the person you're going to want to do this particular project with. But if you'd like to do the assessment, then we can talk about whether we're going to do the project, and you can make another decision at that point. And so then we would kind of lay out what the assessment was. And sometimes you pick and choose an assessment premised on the client's initial feelings about the situation. So there may be a particular assessment that would gather all of the information you kind of were looking for from the organization, but also had a bent towards what the client says they think is the problem. So there that you can do that, and sometimes there are assessments that are so comprehensive and broad enough that when you implement them, whatever the client is telling you is probably going to be encompassed in the assessment process. So, which is the one organization I tended to work with. That I think probably 99% of the time I the problem that the client thought was an issue, if it was an issue, appeared in that assessment to be an issue. So uh, part of this is finding the right groups of people and the types of assessments you want, but you certainly don't want to use a single assessment for every project unless you're very comfortable that assessment is going to cover a wide breadth of data that would encompass so many varying things that you feel comfortable on an ongoing basis that you can probably address any customized aspect of a problem that a client might have. Uh, this company I'll show you in a little bit was pretty much like that. Uh, However, I have used some other additional assessments that more narrowly focused on something like leadership behavior or communication behavior or some things like that. In many cases, I have found that a lot of these larger assessments that are focusing on culture and team and leadership have elements of interpersonal communication in them, but not enough to get a good handle on what the problem is. And early on, I learned that many of the problems that were defined from a behavioral leadership perspective were endemic of not having good communication skills. And that wasn't unusual. It's still not unusual today because frankly we don't train people to be effective at interpersonal communication. We train them in language, like English or whatever your language is, and we train them on how to write sentences and vocabulary and word structure and how to put paragraphs together and occasionally you might have a debate course or something that and I don't even know how they tend to work that into communication effectiveness. That's more of a confidence in public speaking scenario. But we normally don't teach people what happens, what's really going on when there's two people. So, communication is something that I tended to eventually design myself. That's where my education is, and that's where a lot of my work has been consulting, as well as when I was a leader inside organizations. I spent a lot of time helping people improve their interpersonal communication. So when I taught them leadership skills, they were more able to effectively implement those skill sets in a way that actually changed behavior, because communication was a big barrier between somebody learning something like motivation and actually applying it to where it changed behavior in their employees. It got down to they understood motivation, they understood the meaning, they grasped the concept, but how they connected with employees was not effective. They had trouble communicating. And frankly, out of the tens of thousands of assessments I've run on employees, and it's been in the tens of thousands over 40 years, they mount up. Uh, I used to ask a question at the. I have a process, and I'll go through that process a little bit with you. But part of the process was validating the information and what we call focus groups and stuff like that. And so I was actually talking after we did assessment. I was actually talking with employees, and I always had three questions. What do you like most about your leader? What do you like least about your leader? And what one thing, if you could select one thing, what one thing would you like your leaders to most improve? And it and nearly 80 or 90% of the time it was communication. Now, they may have said something like, be more empathetic or whatever. But when I asked them to kind of pin down or narrow down the behaviors, exactly what's the leader doing or not doing, it always ended up coming down to the interpersonal communication stuff. They didn't see him frequently enough. When they did see him, they interrupted their conversation or whatever that was. They tended to be interpersonal communication things that were the barriers of implementing things like motivation or empathy or things like that leaders have to have down and be skilled at in order to get employees to get excited and motivated about them uh, and doing their job and engaging in their job. Uh, so interpersonal communication is something that I learned early on. I had to spend time training, and a lot of consultants don't do that. They don't spend time because they're not skilled themselves. And I've talked with a lot of consultants that I've worked with in my life. I've spent actually time coaching the consultants about interpersonal communication because they never had training in it. And they found it extremely useful after that. I've had a lot of people come back to me and say, man, I remember that sitting down and talking about, the idea that the meaning of the message is in the mind of the receiver, and how I had to adapt in order to get somebody to even hear me or want to hear me. And I had stuff like that come back to me all the time from people I work with who were consultants, because I hired a lot of consultants when I was a leader. As a consultant, I engaged a lot of other consultants with specialty areas like finance or environmental or something like that. They were working on projects that I was overseeing, and so we contracted with them to do that kind of work. And when I was working with them, that's where they were going, wow, I just didn't realize how important communication was in me getting through to folks. Um, so assessments, you have to look for things that are going to help you make the total project effective, whether it's a cultural change, whether it's an individual leadership improvement change, whether it's building a high performance team, and we're building a high performance team virtually. And today, yeah, back then, we called them virtual teams. We were doing them. This is 1990s, the latter 1990, 99, 98, 99, early 2000. This idea of remote work had not really caught on. What was going on was in the national realm, you had people who were actually in Europe or Asia or Mid East or South America, and you had teams, uh, they were on this, they were in the same department, but they were scattered across different countries, and you had a team, and you were trying to get that team to work on a project area like supply chain management or something like that. And getting them integrated was difficult because people weren't used to doing this on a video conferencing session. Video conferencing was very, very basic back then. Today, it's wow, it's fantastic. Look what we have here. We got all kinds of stuff now. But back then, it was difficult. And so we were doing this back then. I was building, what does a leader have to know to be a remote leader or a leader with remote workers? It's a different world. You had to approach things differently. Still do today. I don't know if we're really good at even doing that today yet. But of course, I haven't been consulting in that area very any time lately, so I don't know. But assessments became very predominant. They were kind of helping me figure out things that I could get my arms around. Um, so when you're looking for assessment, uh, what would you really be looking for? So let me see if I can pull this up here a second. Here we go. What are you really looking for when you're looking for assessments? And the, the first thing is it needs to be customized to whatever the client needs to have. There are a lot of people out there selling stuff on a regular basis. The question is it something that's really going to help you in the long run? Is it going to service what the client needs? And like I said earlier, sometimes the client really doesn't understand what they need. And you could pick out something that, is being marketed, looks good, sounds good. You conduct the assessments, you come back, you try to do something with it, and it just meets a brick wall. And it's because the methodology used to implement it didn't work well, but the assessment itself really didn't answer the needs or provide the data to help you answer the needs that the client has. And in some cases, it didn't show the client exactly what the real need is. So I always approach assessments from a customized perspective. The client has a sense of need, and from that, I can kind of detect what they think the issue is. And after a while, after several years of doing this, you can kind of pick up on when a client is telling you there's a problem, but it may, like I said earlier, it may not just be that problem. And the first thing I told you about helping the leader and the boss saying, go help this leader, it ended up the boss was a bigger problem than the leader was. And so when those things pop out at you and you don't have some data or something to help validate that, then you become the source that the client looks at and starts blaming you for the inaccuracy or challenging the accuracy of what you're saying. So when you go back and talk to that boss and say, look, I've talked to a lot of employees, I've talked to this leader, I don't think it's a problem between the leader and the employees, but they all mentioned that your approach to this is a little wrong. And if you went in and did that, the client is immediately laying that on your shoulders. You are the now you are the problem, Mr. Consultant. And that's not really a very comfortable position to be in. Wasn't then, and I never got in that position again because I had data behind me. I could always lay this down and say, look, this isn't me. This is what everybody has said in this anonymously driven survey, collected and aggregated. This is generally what people are saying. This isn't me. This is your people telling you this. So, well, how do you respond to that? That's a different approach to me going in and saying, hey, I talked to people and this is your problem. That is a very uncomfortable discussion to be having with clients in the future. So, one of the things you need to do is, yes, customize to the client needs, but be aware that what the client is perceiving may be inaccurate too. So you want something to back you up when you come back and say, what you say your needs are not really what's going on out here. Let me help you discover this. Let's take a look at the data and you kind of tell me what you think it says. And normally, when I with that approach with this, if it was something other than what the client said they needed, it was fairly obvious in the data to them, and that discovery of having them discover it from the data on their own. A lot of times I'd pull together the data, the summary that the assessment company put together for me, and their consultants help work me and understand, and I would say you need to write it this way so the client can understand it. When I take this summary back along with the data and drop it off with the client, said, look, I want you to take a week or so, look at this. I'm going to come back in a week, okay? And let's have lunch. And you tell me what you discovered. And usually, many times, the phrase I got is, wow, this is a wake up call. This is a wake up. I had no idea about this. And I'm going, oh, okay, good. I kind of sensed that too as I went through it. So let's talk about what you discovered and what you think we need to do. And it was from that point we begin to build the project, to scope the project, if you will. And it wasn't me doing it. It was me saying, let me help you kind of work through. I'll be your expert and I'll try to help you see some things, your eyes and ears from a different point of view. What I want you to do is I want you to scope out what we think we need to do and what role I can play in helping you do that. And some things that, I probably could have talked somebody into doing for them, they did on their own, and I didn't get to bill those hours for that time I would have made there, but their engagement with it was so much more effective than had I gone down and done it for them. They were really behind it. At that point it was like, this is my baby and I'm going to make it happen. And I'm going, absolutely right, that's exactly where I want you to be, partner. So customizing and adjusting as you go and how you approach that's my initial approach that I deal with assessments. I have I've you get comfortable with an assessment that's going to give you a really broad big picture of everything that you think a client will need. Now if there's a specific scenario, you might add another assessment in with that, and the client would agree to that. And then you got that data also that you can bring back there to them. And sometimes if they say they had a need, here's another scenario I had. They go, this is the need I have. This is the problem. I'm pretty sure of it. And I'm going, well, let's get a broader view and make sure you're right, because I don't want to go down a road and we're doing the wrong thing, and nor do you, because it's costly. And they go, yeah, okay, but I'm pretty sure this is right. And I go, well, in addition to this assessment, here's something that measures exactly what you're talking about. Let's throw that in too. And they go, okay, that's fine. And when we get in there, and that specific assessment they agreed to and felt comfortable with showed that that wasn't really the problem, it was easier for them to discover that on their own and say, I thought this was it, but obviously, it's some of these other things that you've shown me over here. And so That's very important in order for the client to feel comfortable. They're really addressing the issue that's real, that's causing the underlying behavior. Sometimes they're making decisions based on symptoms, and that, it's kind of like taking a temperature and saying, oh, wow, you have appendicitis. Let's take your appendix out. Well, it may not be appendicitis. You want to do a few more diagnostics before you start yanking appendix out of people. Uh, I had experience as a kid where a doctor tried that. I still have my appendix, by the way. Um, so, uh, making sure, validating, making sure you're giving the client exactly what their needs are and getting them highly engaged in the very beginning is an important part of that assessment process. Now, so the other thing you want to make sure when you select an assessment is that the assessment's reputable. And the way you kind of figure that out is you look for something where it's been used a lot before or you've used it a lot. Now, my assessment I use for communication is something I designed. It's a fairly long assessment. Something is 140 behaviors for people to evaluate. I designed it a specific way because people are not used to giving opinions about communication behavior. They're not taught about it, nor are their leaders taught about it. So I had to approach that differently. So I designed my own communication survey, and I'm the only one that uses it to help clients. But I tell them that up front. It's not something that has been used with other clients, but you can look at this, and if you feel uncomfortable with it, we just won't do it. I haven't had it ever rejected yet. Um, and communication issues are. But for most assessments out there, for a cultural assessment, for a team effectiveness for assessment, for a leadership effectiveness assessment, or the integration of all three of those, which I've done in some pretty comprehensive projects, you want a reputable assessment, one that's been used and proven effective across other clients in the past, one that has actually you can see and where it's been used and the track record has been effective with other people. Uh, in my Renaissance Leadership Odyssey paradigm, that's a full change about how you look at leadership and how organizations ought to structure to be more effective and optimize their leadership more effectively in a hierarchical structure. And most everybody is hierarchically structured. Um, uh, you know, Trying to figure that information out and find a reputable organization that is focused on the kind of change needs to take place with leaders to be effective in the future. Um, I found someone who did that effectively, and it was using stuff that was not available to me in the 1990s, the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, because neuroscience and the behavioral psychology and performance psychology was not available to me then. Uh, it wasn't until like 2011 when Shirzad Shamim began using this in his program called Positive Intelligence, which is one of the things I think really solidifies what we need to do with leaders that we missed for 40 years that I was doing leadership development. So now, why would I select that? One, he's done this over 500 or 600 different companies around the world. He's done it in with athletic performance. He's done it with businesses. He's done it with nonprofits and profits. He's done it with a variety. He's got over 1 million subject cases that they have done a factor analysis on to determine the kinds of things that get in the way of people's thinking. that they need to learn how to correct. And he's given you a tool for how to correct it. And he has demonstrated with statistical evidence based data that it changes the behavior. It changes behavior. And it has a significant impact on the effectiveness of organization and people in their lives. So, why would I point you in that direction? That's because I've done the work to see that this is a reputable, has multiple clients, has a proven track record of change backed by evidence based science, not just opinions or I think this is going to work or this is make you feel better. It's evidence based behavior change that he can point to and show you that it works. So I have selected that as one of those assessments. I don't do. I'm not an expert in that area, but when I start with a client, I'm pointing and they want to do something about their leadership. I'm saying I'm going to point you at this direction. I want you to start by taking this assessment first. And once I can get that going, I think we're going to find that those people are embracing this in large scale formats. I do the same with sociology. That's the psychology side of Renaissance leadership. The sociology side is Daniel Goleman, who is basically the father of emotional intelligence in terms of getting it out to the world. Now, he didn't design it. He is a psychologist, but he was more of an author and a writer about it, but he was able to popularize it and then follow that up with the same kind of background, multiple clients, proven track record of change, evidence based science to show the change. Um, so those two are the two areas that I point people to. That I don't get involved in those assessments. I refer them to people who I know who work in those areas, and they are things that I encourage them to get engaged in and complete the full project scope of the projects and the assessment in order to go, and then I can work with them when they have that kind of knowledge base. I can work with them on integrating that into the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey model for changing their organization and changing the role of leadership and those kinds of things that I'm experienced at making happen in organizations. And then the communication assessment, again, is the one I use. And certainly a client could pick out another one, but this one is pretty comprehensive. It's based on my 45 years of actually changing communication behavior before we started doing leadership skills training, and my education, my 8 years of education, and the research I've done over those 45 years on communication on a regular basis. So it's pretty solid information. I haven't bothered to statistically validate it yet. I guess I can. I just never tracked enough of the responses. The responses delivered the results, so I didn't necessarily need to show the client that it was valid. But if I were going to try to market that on a buy this per assessment basis, I would have to do all the statistical work, and I'm not sure I'm going to offer it up that way. Um, but anyway, it needs to be reputable. Whatever you're doing needs to be reputable. These are the criteria that you want to do with that. But you also have to make sure that that stuff that you're using is valid. What's that mean? It means that what those questions or what those statements that people are responding to have been proven to really effectively measure the behavior that you're looking for in people. And that's where the statistic validation and everything becomes important. If you know if you're going to use something that somebody else has done, if somebody else wanted to use my interpersonal communication assessment besides me, then probably I would want to start doing the validation studies. I'm pretty sure how they'll turn out. Uh, in which case then I would say, okay, this is going to cost you $35 a head to do it, or something like that, whatever the fee would be. And here's, it's statistically valid. It's, factor analysis broken these categories out as the right categories. It's content valid, and that we experts help me design the behavior questions that I'm asking these people to fill out. And it's pretty. And then the next thing is it reliable? If 100 people take it, do they pretty much answer the question the same way given the situation? So if it's reliable, that's important. So validity and reliability become important if you're buying this survey from someone else. And it needs to be reputable and that you've actually seen it work somewhere else. Because there's a lot of stuff out there that people might put out that may or may not be as valid and reliable as you've seen. But there are a lot of companies, DDI, Human Synergistics, McKinsey, Gallup, a bunch of other people put out a lot of survey data and a lot of assessment data that has been proven to meet these criteria that we've talked about so far. So, what's the other thing? It needs to be valued or reasonably priced. When you're talking to a client, the first question they ask is, how much is this going to cost me? And I'm going, how valuable is it to you? Is my response always. They go, well, I don't know because I've never done this before. And I go, well, let me tell you this. You can go, it's like anything, and you get what you pay for. And yes, you can go find these free surveys online, and what you'll get is some information. In fact, some of these surveys you find online are going to be valid, going to be reliable, are evidence-based, science and backed, and have been used by other companies. But I can't tell you for sure whether they've impacted change or not because I haven't used them. I'm not familiar with them, but you need to find out. And then you need to decide, you know, what you get, positive intelligence. You can go there today, positiveintelligence.com, and you can take the assessment that will tell you what your saboteurs are. What you won't get is all the knowledge about how to use that data. So that's what we call a loss leader or a draw. You find out a lot about yourself, but then you're kind of relying on yourself to figure out how to make it work. And that's not the evidence-based process that you'll get through licensed or trained and certified instructors in positive intelligence who will help you figure out how to use that information effectively. So, yeah, I mean, you can get some free data, you can get some free communication. Stuff. You can go online, take my vacation, my instrument, and it's on my website and it's out there open to the public. They can go use it all they want. What they won't do, and what they won't get until they talk to me and we can talk through the data with each other, is what each of those categories means and how impactful it is and how to use that when you put it together in a development program so that the person grasps what I mean when I say the meaning of the message is in the mind of the receiver. There's some implications to that. If you take a minute and think about it, there are a lot of things that happen between the time you create a message, someone receives what you say. There are a lot of barriers in the middle of all of that that people don't even think about. It's almost instinctive. They think they've communicated something. And a lot of times bosses would come back to me and say, I've told them this. And they go, I'm going, they just didn't do it. I don't know. It couldn't be any clearer in this memo. And I'm going, yeah, let's go back and talk about the what you said, the idea that you put it in a memo, whether that allowed for clarification. How did you know they understood? When you start ask those kinds of questions, then they go, "Oh my gosh, maybe I can see how they didn't understand it." So what you're looking for in an assessment is what's going to work for you and deliver the results that's going to be worth the money you spend to put into that assessment. And usually, quality, evidence based, valid, reliable instruments have taken a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money to evolve. So they don't come cheap usually. Yeah, they're not the things that you open up, whatever ladies' journal or whatever men's journal you open up, there's a survey in there. Uh, it's a different approach when you're really trying to change people's behavior. So value is the key. And that's why when they go, well, how much is this going to cost? And I'm going to say, well, I know what the cost of survey is. Here's the number of people we're going to survey. Here's what we have to do to make sure we understand that what's been said is in fact real and correct. All of this mounts up to, I don't know, $25,000, $30,000 for a couple hundred people. Um, Now that sounds like a lot of money, but if you have this data come out of there and you're certain about it, you know exactly what to do to change behaviors. How much is that going to add to changing your problem or improving whatever you expected to improve because of the change process? What's the value in it? Not how much is it. So I normally say that's it's probably the wrong question. How much is probably the wrong question. The question is, how valuable is it for you? You know. Now let's talk about it in terms of those costs, and then I don't think I can remember anybody denying the assessment process because of money. Once we had it lying in there. Uh, Next thing is it easily administered? Now, today that's so much easier because you can literally go online and take this assessment straight online. And there's a lot, and encompassed with that is the last thing I want you to do the security and the protection, the anonymity and the privacy involved. Is absolutely critical when you're doing an assessment. The only data you want to bring back to your client is aggregated data where no individual or group can be isolated out in terms of specific individuals that you can go to and say, I know what you said on your assessment. You never want that happening in an assessment process. It's not the goal. The goal is to change the overall behavior. What you're going to find is when you start changing the overall behavior, those people who are struggling with that will become apparent without having to use the assessment to make that happen. They'll become apparent in the standard performance process that you're dealing with people. So it's important. These are critical things that you want to look for in an assessment in your process. So uh, when I do that, when I'm engaged in that kind of stuff, like I said, I do it in two phases. The first phase is I sit down and I listen to what the client is telling me is the problem, and I'm going, I'd really like to get a handle not only on that problem, but the impact that it might be having beyond where you think it is. There's a possibility that's there. And I think that would be valuable information for you to have. And like I say, once we agree on that and the process and the cost and everything that's associated with that phase, I go ahead and complete the assessment. I guide the assessment. They don't. I use third parties. I don't use anybody inside the organization. We use a third party who can give us all that anonymity, all of that stuff that we talked about in the previous area slideshow. Uh, and then I collect that data and I look at it. And I then arrange to have some focus groups throughout the organization, sort of random. Sometimes I individually select certain groups to make sure they're inclusive. That may not be inclusive if you didn't do that, but enough of the employees on a random sort of basis to go back through and say, here's sort of what we discovered. Does that make sense to you? And then a lot of times they'll go through and say, yeah, or no, we never saw that in our department. But when you run another focus group, it may be, yeah, I see it in this department. Well, you're getting an idea of where the issue is. Um, and the employees are kind of giving you a sense, they're sort of validating that that information is correct. And you get a lot of information at that point in time about how employees feel about this and what's going on. And the fact you are engaging them at the lowest possible level all through the organization up to the top, employees all of a sudden hear and see this information. They're a little skeptical about how you're going to use it, but you reassure them it's just going to be aggregate data that's presented. Nobody can be identified in this. And then you take it back that way. The summary you put together is collected and put back that way. And you can simply say, I've reviewed this with some employees and I found either these errors or these areas don't seem to be as much a concern to employees, but we can't, that's just a random sample of them. Uh, but it's something to consider. This may not be as difficult as you think in these areas, or, you know, this has pretty much been validated by the employees out there. So, as a whole. And so, here's your information. I lay it on the desk and I say, take a week and read it. Share it with your senior people and read it and then discuss it together. And then I'd like to come back and meet with you first. And you tell me what you think you saw. And that's where I get, wow, this is a wake up call kind of thing most of the time. But then I'm going, now I want you and I to sit down with your leaders and I want them to tell us, me and the chief guy here or gal, and say, tell me what it is you think this is saying. And some of them are going to hem and haw around because they think they recognize the data and they recognize the data may be pointing at them, but we don't want them to feel like that we're isolating them out. uh, they may feel it, but it's important they understand we're approaching this from a whole group perspective. The whole organization will benefit from this. And once this is done, normally it's at that point I can sit down with the executive, and sometimes they'll bring in their chief financial officer because money is being spent. And we need to decide on the criteria that's going to be used to evaluate whether or not the money is spent is having an impact and that there is a real value for the money that's being spent. And there have been times where I've said, here's what I here's one criteria we ought to look at, and we looked at it, and it really didn't make much of a change in that criteria what we were doing, and we either had to change it on the spot, or I had to simply say, hey, let's don't bill that out because it's not making a difference. Okay, and it's amazing when they have the capacity to make these changes or adjustments. There's virtually no resistance to spending the money and moving it in the direction that they think is going to really help them and does eventually help them in the end. And that's why you shake hands, and everybody feels comfortable. So you've got it. You can always call me back. Now, I recommend you do, and this is the next thing I want to say to you. I recommend you follow this up with further assessment, the exact same assessments down the road. So we may want to come back in and not plan a project, just do another assessment to make sure you feel like you're on track. Maybe you're going to do that 6 months down the road. Maybe you're going to do that a year down the road. But do it. Make sure you impose the changes that are made are in fact happening as there. Now, if there's some things that don't aren't working quite as well as you want, we can talk about coming back in and working with those people. We could decide whether it was what we decided didn't work after all, in which case we need to do some band-aid and repair work, and that's not going, some of that I may just come back and do, and some of it, no, we can see that you didn't actually execute what you said you were going to do. But the client has to make that decision in conjunction with you. You guys have to agree that some of this was what we were saying we should try didn't work. Some of it is you didn't really try hard to implement it effectively as hard as we could have. And we don't want that to be a blame scenario. We just want it to be a point of data. And what do we have to do to correct that? So some of that's built out, some of that's not. Kind of depends on the situation you're looking at. But assessments help define on an ongoing basis how impactful the work was you did. And it takes the blame off of the consultant, and it takes the blame off of the client. Okay, it puts it into the organization, not blame. It just simply says this wasn't working. We need to adapt or adjust until it does have an effect on the organization behavior. And so you work at it that way. And a lot of times that was a lot of ongoing consulting work I ended up doing. We went back in and said, yeah, there are always other kinds of things that would generate another need for an assessment sooner than a year. It could be you switch a significant leader in the organization. And after a couple of months or 3 months of them being in place, you may want to come in and assess just that part of the organization again, using the same assessment material to see if that person you placed in there is actually executing and implementing what you said. And whether there's some things missing in their knowledge base they need to regain or to gain and improve on, or maybe some things that they're just not quite as effective at doing that we need to enhance their skill level, whatever that might be. So there's things like that. There are a lot of external things that impact the need for assessment. A competitive threat, new leadership acquisitions, or divestitures in many cases may require you to take another snapshot of the organization to see where you are after you got all of that lined out, because you continue want to improve and see consistent improvement. And assessments are great, great tools for leaders to do that if, in fact, they are making that happen. Now, like I said, the approach you use to do assessments critical. I use what I call a triangular approach. The first part of that is to get a reputable assessment completed in the organization. Then the second part of that is once I have that data and the experts for that assessment group have shared that data, we concur on what this data is saying. I take that data and I share that with the population of the audience that we assessed just to make sure that what I saw presented in the data, the assessment itself, is still the feeling that's out there in the organization. That's where a lot of these three questions came from. I told you earlier, but the one that had so much significance to me was what's the one thing you would like if you had to select one thing, what would that one thing be you'd like to see your leader improve on? And communication came up so frequently over. I mean, even if they were talking about, they go, well, I like him to be a better leader. I say, what's that mean? And tell me what kinds of things he's doing or not doing, and or she's doing and not doing. I have to keep bringing that up because by definition, we've been ingrained for so long to eliminate women, but women are very prominent today in leadership. Uh, what's she doing that bothers you about leadership, and always almost boiled down to some sort of communication issue and how they communicate. But that's not the only thing. It could be the lack of empathy. The lack of course, you have to have communication to show empathy. And if you don't show it, then just the void of empathy is a nonverbal communication to the employee that you don't care. So, um, but but what we might find is that person really doesn't grasp empathy. They didn't even have empathy for themselves. And that's where that psychology role comes in, and that you work through some of that before you turn a leader loose and say you need to learn about empathy. Um, there's a lot about themselves they need to learn before they learn that. So there's a lot of dynamics associated with this. Much of it has to do with the quality of the diagnostic of what's going on. That is the role of assessments that are out there. Now, I've been at this for quite a while. So it's about an hour and 16 minutes, it looks like. And I haven't had any questions coming from anybody in an audience. So I'm just pretty much assuming nobody's clicked on the live button in LinkedIn, or nobody's clicked and joined on the live session in YouTube, where you can actually get on here and ask a question. So I'm going to give it a few more minutes. And what I am going to say, well, first, let me take you to an example, and I'm only going to use one example. This is the company that I used for over 35 years to do some assessments for me in so many roles, both when I was an internal leader and both also when I was a consultant working with organizations. So let me take you to this group here. This is called Human Synergistics. They work out of Plymouth, Michigan, I believe. Actually moved up there and was only about 40 miles from them, and got to meet the person I dealt with for 20 years that I in person had lunch with her. She was just a fabulous person. They have so much to offer us out there in the organization. Let me go up in here, and yeah, I can go ahead. So here are some of the things that they have available to them: organizational development, leadership and management development, group and team development, individual development, leadership development programs, culture challenges, merger integration. So this is something they've actually put in since I worked with them. And they also have a full product list of a lot of other things they do. But merger integration was not something that was on their radar when I was dealing with them in the organization. The the instruments that were used that I used on an ongoing basis, I normally ran simultaneously the organizational culture stuff, the culture change, and the leadership development program and the team development programs. I ran those assessments nearly all the time simultaneous. So there were three assessments going on simultaneously. And that gave me a good picture of the change, the culture, the leadership level, the performance level of leadership, and the effectiveness of teams. And these programs are so highly integrated that you can begin to draw conclusions that leaders had an impact on teams, and teams had an impact on the overall culture, for example. And once you had all of that data and you were looking at it, you were consolidating it, and they have consultants that can help you work on this information and put it into something extremely useful for your particular need. Then you get that data from them, a summary, and it's an exceptional summary you get from them, along with graphs and charts. Let's see if I can see here. Let's see. Wow. So actually, they have something this associate. I'm sorry, I have something called essential shakes. It's difficult for me to get to something. Let me just click on cultural changes. Maybe that'll be easier. Um, Here you have diversity inclusion, mergers and acquisitions, organizations, etc. You can actually get people accredited in your organization to do this internally, which I highly recommend under the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey program. Um, but uh, as you can look at some of this information, you can see various aspects of uh, let's see here, we can learn more. Change solutions for organizations. There you have, here are the offices, accredited practitioners, 3,100 of them, 50 years of experience in this area. So you can actually view an assessment here. So this is, and let me just kind of give you an example. Uh, Assessment details. This is the organizational effectiveness inventory. It's actually, I had something designed like this early on. I think this came in, they also began to see the importance of organizational culture to what I call organizational effectiveness also. So this is good because you don't have to design your own stuff to understand this. It's done for you. Let me go over here and see if I can go up a little bit on this. There. Oops, sorry. Got to go back here. I apologize for messing things up here. I wanted to see if I could show you. Let's see, we were learning more here. Industry view assessments. So, uh, assessment details. Let's take a look at this one. How it works. There's how it works, the benefits. Uh, so there's a lot of things that you can do here that will help you understand a lot about. Let's see. Here's the organizational culture inventory. Uh, I'm trying to see if I can get down to there's financial returns. They help you figure out every possible thing that you could want here. Uh, Organizational overview. Uh, let's see, pending. I was trying to see if I could get an example of one of their surveys. But here they actually work you through. I mean, uh, there's an example of a survey right there. So here's they break this down into a circle, a diagram, and it's a centrifugal circle that measures the degree this would be an ideal culture. So they provide you what an ideal culture is. Where does that come from? That comes from all of that work I tell you, the evidence based work, scientific evidence, valid and reliable work they do across various corporations, thousands of people. uh, they get an idea of the kinds of cultures that tend to deliver better performance based on performance criteria like product quality, cost, things like that. These cultures tend to deliver a better product versus this culture over here. So, this may be the way when you're assessed your culture looks. Okay. And this might be the ideal culture. And then what happens is you get a chance to go through this model that drives you in and collects all the data and shows you the variances, where you're strong, where you're weak. For example, there's a lot of culture in this area here, which is a little more, I think, directive oriented, and over here there's a lot less of that in ideal culture. So you actually get a chance to see what you think you would do in that area. So human synergistic, so their website will be down in the description here, but it kind of tells you what's going on in an assessment. So that's one that you can see why I use that organization. It covers so much at one shot. And when you get in there, what you might find, what that leader might find who allows that assessment to transparent, not only did the need that they felt they had, but they may have a deeper understanding of what's behind that need. But in addition to that, there may be other needs out there that they need to address that are impacting that need that they felt they had. So they get a lot more, usually they get a lot more information and a lot more valuable information than they anticipated from the assessment because they don't do the assessment. And then of course you can use this to sustain that. Or maybe, like I said, mergers, and they've obviously added mergers and acquisitions since I used them last. Things impact organizations on a regular basis. A pandemic, a merger and acquisition, a divestiture, a government regulation, a whole bunch of things impact different organizations different ways. These assessments allow you to adapt and make the changes through your people that you need to make to ensure you have a quality environment. So, assessments are critical. Their assessments are critical in so many areas in so many ways. What I'm explaining to you is the assessments associated with leadership and the culture change and the team effectiveness aspects of the organization. That's what the idea here is. We need to change the paradigm about how we do leadership and how important the role of leadership is to enhancing the effectiveness and optimizing everyone in the organization in that hierarchical structure, that top down hierarchical structure, which nearly every organization is that way. They tried flattening them in the 1990s and it didn't work. We're back to the hierarchical structure, it stays intact. But there's ways we can optimize this by looking at a different role that leaders can play today and ways we can enhance those leaders to be more effective in those roles. So I hope you find that helpful and beneficial. Again, this is a podcast explaining the impact of organizational assessment or assessments in general on organizations and individuals in the organization, and how important it is to sustain that performance through assessments. So, if you have questions on this, if you're watching this later on LinkedIn or you're watching it later on YouTube, this just kind of tickles your fancy. Um, Hopefully, I've given you some good criteria to look at assessments. I've given you how to approach the assessment process. I've given you rationales for the things that are going to impact your organization that you need to assess and and see the impact, and also the necessity of sustaining your effectiveness and continue to enhancing it with regular ongoing assessments, using the same assessments each time to enhance your organization's overall effectiveness and to optimize your leadership and all of your employees in that organization. The questions that you have, you're welcome to write in the comments section wherever I post these. You're also probably the best place to put them, where I look most frequently is my YouTube community uh, posting board area. There is a YouTube community on my. If you go to Building Renaissance Leaders, my YouTube channel, on there is a tab called Community. You can go in there. You can answer my polls and questions. Tells me a lot. You can write in comments what you would like to see about leadership. What are the pain points you have? What are the things that are bugging you as a leader or about your leader? You can list those in the comments section. You can tell me the things you'd like for me to do on a podcast that might be helpful to you for as a leader, or help you as an employee to relate to your leaders, or as a senior person, how to better impact your organization through leadership. Uh, you can tell me that you'd like to talk to me about implementing building Renaissance leaders, our Renaissance Leadership Odyssey, the paradigm program, the organizational change program I got. I am going to launch separately from the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey program a course I have on interpersonal communication, just because I feel like it's absolutely void out there now. Right now, I don't know anybody that's put together a comprehensive interpersonal communication leadership educational program that leaders can use, that people can use in general in their personal life, that can help college kids, can help high school kids, in fact, for that matter, who are going to college and will be working in businesses in the community in the future. This it's a 12-week program. It's 2 hours a night, one night a week. I do it in groups of six. I need to have, I don't want to do it unless I have at least four people in a course, and I don't want more than 6 people in the course. So 6 would be an ideal group. If I can fill a class with 6 people, we do that 2 hours a night. The first 30 or 40 minutes is a little bit of a review about the topic area, like active listening or the communication continuum or persuasion or something like that. These are all topics that I taught leaders uh, how to communicate effectively. These topic areas were areas I covered before we even got into talking about improving them as a leader. They had to first learn how to connect and do that. So I am uh, that I am conducting that course. It's called Interpersonal Communication Leadership Course. I'll start that in July. I am looking for 6 people to go into the July class. Again, it's a 12-week course, one night a week, 2 hours a night. Think of it as a graduate level seminar, a semester on interpersonal communication seminar, um, one night a week, 2 hours a night for 12 weeks. So that's kind of like a semester of graduate level format and concept and material. Um, in a semester environment, so to speak. It's highly interactive. The 6 people in the course will actually be a team working on this. They'll have stuff they have to do outside of the course for the following week's class that they need to get accomplished as a team and as individuals. There's some assessment stuff in there on interpersonal communication, as well as some things on conflict management and other areas that you're going to find useful and helpful as a leader down the road. So that's coming up. I am going to put that, I will be announcing it on LinkedIn, YouTube, everywhere else. I will put a link starting sometime towards the end of June or the middle or end of June. I will be putting a link in, well, we're in the middle, so I'll try to get that website done so I can get the enrollment form on top of that quickly and get that engaged. It is something that you'll be able to pay through PayPal, which you if you're going through PayPal and you use PayPal itself, I think there's a way of making payments available on that. But you can also put it on your annual credit card. Obviously, that course structure, it's pretty pricey. It's like $799 a head, but you can divide that up in monthly payments over the course of your credit card. So that's the only way I can. I don't have a thing where I do a finance on the program. I can't afford to do that, but you can do it through your credit card program because I take all major credit cards and PayPal. So that's available. Um, so you can work that out. Uh, like I said, I need to have 6 people in the course to make it really, really effective in terms of the integration and the work we're doing. Um, So look for that everywhere where I'm posting. As soon as you see that up, there's a enrollment blank for you to, or enrollment page. You can go on my website and enroll, and uh, that'll work real well. I might even just use a Google website and put up a separate web page for that. Just that. So I'm not quite sure yet. I've got a few days I have to work on that, but it is ready to go and we're ready to start classes. And that would be a beneficial thing for any leader to have under, beneficial thing for anybody to have under their belt. Um, and so if something special comes up where you want to enroll 6 of your people in the company, then I'll talk to you about a different pricing structure. If you have 6 high school students and parents can watch the program enough as chaperones, if you will, without being on air. I might arrange a different price structure if high school kids want to learn how to do that. Um, and we have to be very careful that it's monitored and parents can sit in on the classes with their kids and things like that. So nobody feels anything is wrong with that process. That one will be highly controlled. Um, but that'll be available coming up in the near future. Watch for that. Uh, Thanks for watching this. Assessment's biggest tool I've had for getting clients to buy in. I just love it. Once you get the process down and once you get the right tools, you're going to find it's just absolutely marvelous and taking a lot of the sting out of consulting in an organization. Okay. Again, I don't have anybody checking anything off. I don't see any comments on LinkedIn here, and I don't see any comments on um, YouTube that I can think. No, nobody's coming up on the chat on YouTube, so I'm not sure I made it onto YouTube. I find it difficult. I put both of these in, and they say it's showing, but when I go live for some reason, something doesn't connect or doesn't quite connect, and that could be me. I'm not an expert at this kind of stuff, but it is what's going on right now. So we'll have to see how that checks out. Uh, until next time, there's a couple of things. The Renaissance Leadership Odyssey program is the change program I use. It is a full change consulting program. It is not a 1 hour coaching kind of thing. This is a full change in your organization. And the other thing is, people ask me sometimes if there's ways to give me something for information I have out there. This is stuff that helps me buy my equipment, pay my fees for being online. It's a a few $1,000s a year to do these things every year. And right now, there's no income coming in from them. I'm not trying to generate a massive income, but if there is a way that you can, if you like what I'm doing and you think it's valuable to you and you've gotten something from it, then and you say, hey, I'd like to give him something, you can buy me a coffee there. You stick your telephone up there on photo, and it'll you zoom or you focus in on that QR code there, and come up with a page called Buy Me a Coffee. It's my front page. And you don't have to be a membership in there. I think you can become a member for $5 a month, but you don't have to. You can just buy me a coffee on there. Sometimes the coffees are $1, $2, $3, $4. I think there's $5. If you hit 5 coffees, it'd be $5 in there. It's just a way of helping me, um, put some money towards the expenses for doing these podcasts. Um, it's not something that you have to do though. But I mean, you can do more. I mean, you can actually go in there and if you want to buy me 100 coffees, you can. There's a way to do that. Um, so that's kind of up to you. If you think something's valuable enough, you're listening to here. Always appreciate that kind of thing right up here. Uh, but it's not something I require. I'm going to be putting it out here because I think it's good for you to have. And I wished I would have had it when I was coming up in leadership. So join me on the Building Renaissance Leaders. Go in there and subscribe and hit like and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of these last minute things that I'm putting together too. That's important. Okay, until next time, I hope you enjoyed the program. Let me know how you feel about it. Let me know in comments what you would like for me to help you with in the future podcast. And any questions on assessments, go ahead and put in the comments or go over to the YouTube community, like I said, and put them in over there. Have a great day.